The cloud becomes a battlefield. How Iran's threats against American data infrastructure signal the arrival of hybrid economic war in the Gulf. What if the next war doesn't begin with missiles hitting airbases, but with servers going offline? Iran has just claimed it struck cloud infrastructure linked to Amazon in the Gulf. If true, this isn't just retaliation, it could be the opening move of something much bigger, the first war against the internet itself. For decades, wars in the Middle East began with the same choreography: missile strikes on airbases, attacks on tankers, mobilizations along borders, or threats to close the Strait of Hormuz. Today, however, the opening move of escalation may look different. It may arrive not as an explosion over a runway, but as downtime in a data center, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, announced strikes against cloud infrastructure belonging to Amazon in Bahrain and Oracle in Dubai. It was tempting to dismiss the claim as propaganda. Regional governments issued denials. Companies avoided confirmation. Damage assessments remained ambiguous. Yet whether the strikes were tactically decisive matters less than what they represent strategically. The message was unmistakable: in the emerging confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States, hyperscale data infrastructure has joined pipelines, ports, and airbases as a legitimate target set. This is not merely escalation. It is transformation. A new form of warfare is taking shape, one that treats cloud computing as critical terrain and multinational corporations as strategic actors. If sustained, this shift could redefine deterrence in the Gulf and reshape the global geography of digital power. The end of civilian infrastructure as a sanctuary. For much of the post-Cold War era, global technology companies operated under a quiet assumption. Their infrastructure might be hacked, surveilled or regulated, but rarely bombed. That assumption is eroding rapidly. Cloud regions now host sovereign financial systems, defense logistics platforms, energy sector analytics, artificial intelligence training pipelines, maritime tracking infrastructure, government digital services. In other words, they are no longer purely commercial assets. They are hybrid strategic nodes embedded within national security architectures. Iran's warnings against American technology companies operating in the Gulf, including Apple, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Intel, Tesla, Boeing, and J.P. Morgan, should therefore be read not as rhetorical excess, but as doctrinal signaling. Tehran is redefining the boundary between civilian and military infrastructure in a digitalized theater of competition. In doing so, it is following a pattern already visible elsewhere. Russia has targeted Ukrainian telecommunications networks. Israel has struck industrial facilities linked to Iranian weapons programs. China treats semiconductor supply chains as strategic leverage. Iran is now extending the logic into cloud infrastructure. The result is a widening of the battle space without formal declaration. Why Bahrain matters more than it appears. Bahrain may not seem like a major geopolitical hub. It is small, financially dependent on neighbors and geographically exposed. Yet in the architecture of Gulf digital transformation, it occupies a pivotal role. Amazon's regional cloud presence there functions as a backbone for fintech platforms across the Gulf, logistics integration for maritime trade, energy sector data management, regional startup ecosystems, government digital transformation initiatives. In practical terms, the Bahrain cloud region supports the transition of Gulf economies away from hydrocarbon dependence and toward service-based digital infrastructure that makes it strategically valuable and strategically vulnerable. A successful disruption of even a portion of this infrastructure would not merely inconvenience corporate users. It would raise insurance costs, deter investment, and undermine confidence in the Gulf as a safe environment for digital capital. Iran understands this well. Its signaling is aimed not only at Washington, but at Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Manama. The implication is clear: alignment with American security policy carries economic consequences. From tanker wars to server wars, Iran's strategic toolkit has evolved steadily over the past 4 decades. During the Iran-Iraq War, it targeted shipping in the Gulf. In the 2000s, it invested heavily in proxy warfare. In the 2010s, it expanded drone and missile capabilities. In the 2020s, it has increasingly embraced cyber operations. Now it is experimenting with a hybrid synthesis, physical strikes against digital infrastructure. This represents a shift from territorial warfare to systems warfare. Rather than confronting American military superiority directly, Iran is targeting the connective tissue that sustains Western influence across the region. Data centers, logistics platforms, and industrial networks are difficult to defend comprehensively and politically difficult to retaliate over decisively. That makes them ideal tools for calibrated escalation. In strategic terms, Tehran is attempting to impose distributed costs rather than decisive defeat. Deterrence through economic exposure. Iran's threats against technology firms reflect a broader theory of leverage. The United States is powerful militarily, but structurally dependent on globalized corporate networks. By targeting those networks, Iran hopes to reshape the cost-benefit calculations of escalation, AI compute infrastructure, corporate supply chains, and regional investment environments. This strategy mirrors earlier Iranian operations against oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and shipping in the Gulf. But its digital dimension introduces a new layer of uncertainty. Economic deterrence is harder to measure than military deterrence. It operates through investor psychology rather than battlefield attrition. And it can spread rapidly. If multinational firms begin to treat Gulf cloud infrastructure as a contested environment, capital allocation decisions will shift accordingly. Silicon Valley enters the battle space. Iran's warnings to American corporations reveal something deeper than retaliation for assassinations. They reflect a revised understanding of American power itself. For decades, Washington's strength rested on alliances, military bases, and naval dominance. Today it also rests on platforms, networks, and data centers. Cloud computing companies have become extensions of geopolitical influence. They enable digital sovereignty projects, military interoperability, cross-border financial integration, AI research capacity, secure communications ecosystems. To attack them is therefore to challenge the infrastructure of American primacy. Iran's targeting logic suggests it no longer sees the distinction between public and private American power as strategically meaningful. This is an important conceptual shift, and a potentially destabilizing one. Israel's shadow in the escalation ladder. The IRGC's references to industrial facilities linked to Israel, including infrastructure associated with defense manufacturer Rafael, indicate that the cloud strikes form part of a broader retaliatory framework rather than an isolated action. Israel's campaign of covert strikes against Iranian military and nuclear personnel has long operated below the threshold of conventional war. Tehran's response now is widening its target set horizontally rather than vertically. Instead of striking Israeli territory directly, Iran is signaling willingness to target the economic ecosystem surrounding Israeli security partnerships. That includes Gulf states increasingly integrated into Israeli defense and technology networks following normalization agreements. The battlefield is expanding not geographically, but structurally. The vulnerability of concentrated cloud geography. Hyperscale computing infrastructure is efficient precisely because it is concentrated. A handful of regional clusters manage enormous volumes of traffic and storage. This creates economies of scale. It also creates single points of failure. Unlike traditional telecommunications networks, cloud regions cannot easily be relocated during crises. Their construction requires stable electricity supply, regulatory predictability, secure fiber connectivity, skilled labor pools. These constraints limit redundancy. A small number of targeted disruptions can therefore produce disproportionate systemic effects. Iran's signaling suggests it understands this asymmetry well. The Gulf's digital transformation is at risk. Over the past decade, Gulf monarchies have pursued ambitious plans to reposition themselves as global technology hubs. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 seeks to anchor post-oil growth in digital services and artificial intelligence. The United Arab Emirates has invested heavily in sovereign cloud partnerships. Bahrain has positioned itself as a regional fintech gateway. These strategies depend on perceptions of stability. If data infrastructure becomes a recurring target, the Gulf's comparative advantage as a secure digital environment could weaken dramatically. Insurance premiums for infrastructure projects would rise. Foreign firms would diversify risk geographically. Sovereign wealth funds might reconsider exposure levels. the economic consequences would extend far beyond any individual strike. The emergence of hybrid infrastructure warfare. The most important implication of Iran's threats is doctrinal rather than tactical. A new category of conflict is emerging: hybrid infrastructure warfare. Its defining characteristics include limited physical strikes, cyber disruption, economic signaling, corporate targeting, and strategic ambiguity. Unlike conventional war, it rarely produces decisive outcomes. Instead, it reshapes incentives gradually. Unlike cyber war alone, it includes physical attacks on digital systems. Unlike proxy warfare alone, it directly affects multinational firms. This combination makes it difficult to deter and difficult to respond to proportionately. It also makes escalation unpredictable. The insurance industry as an early warning system. One of the earliest indicators of strategic change is often not military deployment but insurance pricing. If cloud infrastructure in the Gulf begins to attract war risk premiums like those applied to shipping in contested waters, it would signal a profound shift in how the private sector perceives regional stability. Such a shift could unfold quietly but rapidly. Investment decisions in data infrastructure depend on long-term risk calculations. Even small increases in perceived vulnerability can alter the economics of expansion. Iran's strategy may therefore aim less at destroying infrastructure than at reshaping the expectations surrounding it. Strategic signaling is sometimes more powerful than physical damage. The danger of submarine cable escalation. The most consequential escalation step has not yet occurred. All global internet traffic travels through undersea fiber optic cables. Many of these pass through choke points near the Middle East. A coordinated disruption of these routes would produce effects comparable to the closure of a major maritime strait. Financial markets would slow. Cloud services would fragment. Communications latency would spike. Such a scenario remains unlikely in the near term, but it is no longer implausible. If data centers are legitimate targets, cables may eventually become so as well. That would mark the arrival of true infrastructure war. Ambiguity as strategy. One striking feature of the recent incidents is the absence of clear confirmation. Governments deny damage. Companies decline comments. Intelligence leaks remain partial. This ambiguity is not accidental. Hybrid infrastructure warfare thrives in uncertainty. It allows actors to signal capability without triggering retaliation thresholds. It complicates attributes. It preserves diplomatic maneuvering space. Iran has used this approach effectively in maritime and cyber domains before. Applying it to cloud infrastructure extends the same logic into a new arena. The corporate dilemma. Technology companies operating in the Gulf now face a strategic choice. They can continue expanding infrastructure in pursuit of market growth, accepting elevated security risks. Or they can diversify deployments geographically, reducing exposure but slowing regional integration. Neither option is attractive. Militarizing data centers, through hardened perimeters, drone defenses, and intelligence coordination, would raise costs significantly, yet failing to do so may become untenable if attacks persist. The cloud is becoming a security asset as well as a commercial one. That changes everything. Washington's quiet problem. For the United States, the implications are uncomfortable. American military power depends increasingly on commercial digital infrastructure. Cloud services underpin logistics coordination, intelligence processing, and communications integration across theaters. If adversaries begin treating these systems as legitimate targets, deterrence frameworks designed for state-to-state conflict will require adaptation. The United States cannot defend every corporate facility abroad, nor can it ignore attacks against them indefinitely. This tension will shape future crisis responses in ways that are only beginning to become visible. A preview of future conflicts. The strikes announced by Iran may prove limited in operational significance. They may even remain partly symbolic, but they offer a glimpse of how future confrontations between technologically sophisticated adversaries are likely to unfold. Wars will involve servers rather than ships, latency rather than territory, and platforms rather than pipelines. Infrastructure once considered neutral will become contested, and multinational corporations will find themselves acting as strategic actors whether they wish to or not. When the cloud loses its neutrality, for much of its history, the Internet was imagined as a space apart from geopolitics. A domain defined by openness rather than rivalry, that illusion has been fading for years. Iran's threats against American cloud infrastructure suggest it may now disappear entirely. If data centers can be struck like refineries, and cables threatened like shipping lanes, then the digital economy is no longer merely adjacent to conflict. It is inside it. The next crisis in the Gulf may not begin with a tanker explosion or a missile launch, it may begin with a service interruption notice, and by the time the servers go offline, the war will already have started.